In this lesson, I want to show you chord theory and how it works on this instrument. This will give you the ability to find any chord because you'll know exactly how they're built and where they come from. You don't need a teacher or a book that says every guitar chord imaginable. You don't need that. All you need to learn is how the method works for yourself, and then you can build your own chord voicings and do it for yourself. You don't need books or teachers to show you how to play advanced chords. You can actually just do it for yourself once you understand this method. Right now, if I asked you to play me a G7 sharp 5, you might be a little bit confused, and that's okay. After this lesson, you'll know exactly what to do. This is what you'll look like after you finish this lesson and had some time to work it out. You'll be like, okay, I've got a G here, I've got the flat 7 right there, I've got my 3rd right there, the 5th is right here, and if I sharpen that to make it a sharp 5, well then boom, I've got myself a G7 sharp 5. That's what you're gonna look like after you've completed this lesson. To turn you into a chord master, I'm going to be breaking this lesson down into 2 segments. For the first segment, that's where we're really going to dive deep into chord theory and chord formulas, and you'll really learn the rules and how to build chords. In the second segment of the lesson, that's where you're going to turn that knowledge into actual chord shapes you can play on the guitar. So for the first bit, it's going to kind of seem like we're doing stuff that's not relevant to your guitar playing, but stick around, because as soon as we get to that second segment, that's where we're going to turn that into knowledge where you can actually turn it into real chord shapes. So chords are built from scales. Scales are really the building blocks to a lot of things in music. So what we're actually going to start off doing here today is I'm going to show you a major scale on the guitar, and this is going to be the scale we use to build all chords today. So here's what it looks like right here. So that is a 2-octave scale right here. I've got the first note, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and then I'm back to the root right here. And this is a 2-octave scale, so we actually get to keep going. We go root, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, root, and then we're back to the 2nd. Up here. So that is our full major scale. If you've not seen this scale before, I want you to pause the video, take a moment to actually get this memorized. And you don't want to just be able to play it. Well, you want to know this is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You want to know the degrees of the scale like that. That's going to be something that's really helpful for building chords. So every single chord is built from a formula. We're just going to take a few notes from that scale we just learned and combine them. Chord formula tells you which notes from the scale you need to combine. So let's get into the very first chord type of the day, triads. So triads are the smallest, simplest, and most common chords out there. And they are built from just 3 notes from the scale. To build a major triad, you take the first note from the scale. So if we go back to our G major scale here, here's the first note. You don't take the 2nd note, but you take the 3rd note. So I've got 1, I've got 3, and then I take the 5th note. So here's the 4th note, skip that one, boom, there's the 5th one right there. So I've got 1, 3, and 5. The 1, 3, and 5 from the scale. Now, if you know a little bit about the notes on your fretboard, you'll know that that is the note G. This one is the note B, and this one is the note D. So that is how you build a major triad. That's the formula. You take the first note in the scale, the 3rd note in the scale, and the 5th note in the scale. You combine those 3 notes and you get a major triad. In this situation, I've got, like I said, a G, a B, and a D. Now, if we stop for a second here and we take this back to something like a open chord on the guitar, something familiar you've probably seen before. If I take any open G chord shape and I start naming the notes, you're going to find out that it's just G, B, D, those same 3 triad notes I was talking about. So in this 4-finger open G, I've got a G, B, D, G, D, G. So it's still just G, B, D, but some of the notes we have doubled, right? They're still the same G, B, D though, right? If I do another open G shape, maybe this one right here, right? This one's gonna be G, B, D, G, B, and a high G. Again, just the same three notes, G, B, and D. And you'll find that for any G major shape you know, it's just gonna be those three notes, G, B, and D. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, if we've got G, B, and D, and two of those notes are on the same string, well, how can I actually play a chord with this? And you've got a good point. This isn't actually something you can play. Like I was saying, in the second segment of the lesson, that's where we're going to turn this knowledge into actual chords you can play. In the beginning, we're just learning the knowledge. So again, G, B, and D. 1, 3, 5 make a major triad. So one really important piece of information that you need to take away is the fact that the only difference between a major chord and a minor chord was the third. We shifted the third down 1 fret, creating a flat 3, and that is now a minor chord. So instead of just 1, 3, 5, I've got 1, flat 3, and 5. And that's how we get our minor triad. So remember that key detail. The only difference between major triad and a minor triad is the third. For a minor, it goes down 1 fret. Now, when it comes down to reading music, a major triad will oftentimes have nothing written next to it. If you just see the word G, that means G major. If you see C, that means C major, or again, D, that means D major. Now, when it comes down to reading minor triads, what you're then going to do is see a lowercase m. Sometimes you'll see the three letters M-I-N for minor, and occasionally you'll see a little dash for a minor triad. So those two triads make up like 75% of music. But there are two other really interesting 3-note chords I want to talk about at this point, and they're called suspended chords. Now, when it comes down to suspended chords, similar to triads, they contain 3 notes, and there are 2 different types. Now, on the guitar, one of the moves that people love to do is the D sus4 move right here, right? Where you take a D chord and you add on your 4th finger, making that a D sus4 or a D sus2 by removing your 2nd finger. On the guitar, we see it on D all the time. D sus is a super common chord to see. So suspended chords oftentimes get shorted to sus. Suspended is a very long word to say. It's a very long word to write out. So from now on, we're going to call it sus. And there are 2 common forms of the sus chord. You have sus2 and sus4. Now, the main difference between a triad and a sus chord is a triad has the 3rd in it. It's a 1, 3, 5. A sus is a 1 and a 5, but instead of the 3, we're going to put in a 2 for a sus2 or a 4 for a sus4. So no 3rd. So if I spell out G sus2, that would look something like this. I've got the 1st note in my G scale, the 1. Now I'm going to take the 2, the 2nd note in the scale, 1, 2 right there. So that's the note A. And then the 5th note from the scale, the D up there. So G and D, and the middle note is A. So to make a G sus2, I've got G, A, and D combined. Now a sus4 is the same thing, but instead of the 2, you're going to replace it with a 4. So I've got 1 right here on G. I've got the 2, nope, skip it, 3, skip it, 4 right there. So I've got my 4 right there, and then my 5 right there. So 1, 4, 5, or G, C, D. Combine those 3 notes and you get G sus4. Now, sus4 is the more common kind of sus chord. So when you're reading music, if you see one that just says G sus and it doesn't say 2 or 4, that's going to mean 4. If it just says sus, that always implies 4. And sus chords are really interesting because they're not minor or major, right? If I just strum that, it's like, is it happy or sad, right? We go there, is it happy or sad, right? It doesn't have like a distinctive, happy or sad emotion like a major and minor chord do. It's sort of an ambiguous sound on its own, and usually a sus chord will want to resolve back to the original triad. So if I do a sus4, your ears want that to go back to D, right? Hear that resolution in there? Sus4, triad. Just has a nice nice resolution. It feels like you come home when you get back to the triad, right? Same thing with the sus2. If I go sus4, sus2, now back to the triad, like that's got a real nice resolution to it, right? So sus chords have a tendency to want to resolve back to the original triad. And now you've gone through the most common types, major and minor triads and sus2 and sus4. That is a pretty big chunk of music right there. But there are two more triads that I want to talk about at this point. They're a little bit less used, they're a little bit strange to some ears, and that is the augmented and the diminished triad. Two sounds to not overlook. So let's first talk about augmented chords, and these are kind of interesting. So what you do with an augmented chord is you take a major triad and you stretch it out a little bit. What I mean by stretch it out is you're going to sharp the 5. So flat means 1 fret below, sharp means 1 fret above. So major triad with a sharp 5. So I've got my root right here, right? The 3 was right there. 5 is right here. But again, I'm going to raise that 1 up to a sharp 5. So that right there are the notes to G augmented right there. A raised 5th, a sharp 5 in that major triad. Now these are a little bit less common, but my favorite example of one of these is actually in a Beatles song. At the very beginning of Oh Darling, you hear this chord. And it is an E augmented. And this chord, it's a great way to start the song because it creates this kind of suspense, this feeling that needs to resolve, right? Like that chord, it's just so much suspense. Then when you get Paul coming in, oh darling, comes in right on the A chord, and it's like a musical sneeze. You're like, chew, right? So you get all this tension, and then when that resolves to the start of the verse, the A major chord, and Paul McCartney's singing his soul out, right? It just sounds so satisfying. So augmented chords really want to go somewhere else. They create a ton of dissonance, and then when you resolve that dissonance, it sounds amazing. Now, when it comes to written music, an augmented chord will usually be written as a plus sign, or you'll see the 3 letters A-U-G. Now, for the second of the less common triads, we get the diminished triad. And this is a really interesting sound as well to not be overlooked. So a diminished chord is built off of the 1 of the scale. Then you're going to take the flat 3. So here was the 3. I'm going to flatten it 1 fret. So I've got the root, I've got the flat 3. Now for the 5th on a diminished is actually flattened as well. So my regular 5 was here, kick that back 1 fret, it is now flattened. So I've got root, flat 3, and flat 5 to build a diminished triad. These are very similar to the augmented chord in that they're extremely dissonant on their own. But as soon as you put them next to a chord or chords, that's when they sound really interesting. And I find a common use of the diminished chord is to walk between 2 chords. Say I've got this bar chord here, and I've got this bar chord here. And if I want to walk between those 2, that's a common thing too. You go triad, diminished chord right in between the 2, then to the next chord. So root, diminished, 2 chord. Right? And that diminished kind of ties the 2 chords together, sort of like a walk down, like one of these. Right? It kind of walks between them. You can kind of tie 2 chords together, but again, on its own, quite dissonant, right? It's not something you'd sit there strumming at the beginning of the song. It very much has to go between 2 chords. Now, when it comes down to reading diminished chords, you're going to see them as a little circle, kind of like a degree symbol oftentimes, or you'll get the 3 letters D-I-M written next to it. And like I said, augmented and diminished, while they're a little bit weird, they are not to be overlooked. Later on in the session, when I show you actually how to build these chords, you definitely want to build some augmented and diminished chords to keep in your back pocket ready to go, because they do sound very interesting. So that does it for 3-note chords. You've got major and minor triads, you got augmented and diminished triads, and we've got our sus chords. Now, if you've understood everything I've said so far, this should just keep building on the same process. So the next chord we've got is the 6th chord. We get major sixes and minor sixes. A very interesting sound. I find the major 6 chord is a really good one to do as like the ending of a song or something. If you get like a... It's got a nice kind of resolution to it, right? That sounds kind of like a triad, there's just this nice, open, beautiful sound, but there's a little bit more spice or color than a regular triad, right? So how a 6 works and what we do with it is we take the first note of the scale, we take the 3rd note, and we take the 5th note, so that's the, major triad, and then we're going to add the 6th degree of the scale as well, which was this E right here. So 1, 3, 5, and 6. And those are the notes to a major 6 chord. Now you also have minor 6 chords. That's not going to change the 6. That's only going to change the triad. So instead of 1, 3, you get 1 flat 3, 5, and 6. 1 flat 3, 5, 6. But the 6 stayed the same. We don't do flat 6 for a minor. Major 6 and minor 6 both use the same 6. It's the triad that changes. And like I said, these are nice, colorful chords that really work in a lot of situations and sound very similar to a triad. And now for the most important chord types, the 7th chords. These are going to be really important for you if you want to play jazz and blues. And when it comes down to 7th chords, there are 3 main types. You've got major 7, minor 7, and dominant 7, which is also known as just 7. If you see a C7, that means C dominant 7. A major 7 is going to be the triad, 1, 3, 5, so a major triad, but then I'm going to add the 7. Kind of like I did in the 6th chord where I've got the major triad, but now I add a 7 on top. So root, 3, 5, and 7. That's going to get me my major 7 chord right there. Now for a minor 7, this is kind of interesting. When you're playing a minor 7, this one's actually going to affect the 7 as well. So you get a minor triad and you're going to flatten the 7. That's an important thing to remember with minor 7 chords. It's got a flat 7 in there as well. So start off with your minor triad. So root, flat 3, 5th, and then my 7 was right here. Kick that back one to the flat 7. So 1, flat 3, 5, and flat 7 right there. So that is a minor 7. And the final 7th chord type we've got is the dominant 7, also known as just the 7. And that one is going to be a major triad with a flattened 7th. So that would be 1, 3, 5, and then our flat 7 up there. 1, 3, 5, and flat 7 to get the dominant 7th chord. Now the major 7 is a chord you will see in pop music a lot, but it's all over the place in jazz music. One place you will never see a major 7 though is blues music. That chord just does not really fit in there. The minor 7 though, that's a chord you definitely see in the blues. After the blues started going a little bit more electric with guys like B.B. King, that was when you started seeing minor 7s in blues songs all the time. But minor 7s are going to appear in jazz and pop all the time too. And the dominant 7, that one's kind of interesting. That's the chord that the blues is built off of, right? The blues, really the soul of the blues is in the dissonance of the dominant 7th chord. A 12-bar blues progression is just 3 dominant 7th chords stuck together. So you get these really kind of bluesy sounds with the dominant 7s. Those kind of sounds, but then you also get your... some of those more old school kind of fingerstyle blues sounds. The blues is really heavily using that dominant 7th chord. And like I said, it's got a hint of dissonance in there that just gives it that nice spice that we love with the blues music. Outside of blues music, a dominant 7th chord is very commonly used on the 5 chord in a key. So if we're in the key of G here, try going like this. Start on a G chord, go to a D chord, then a D7, and back to the G. Listen to that for a second here. So G, right? That D7 loves when it goes back to that G, right? Like kind of, it's like a question, answer, right? 7th chord, back to the root, right? So that's the 5 chord with a 7, D in this situation, coming back to a G major. So that's a really common use for a dominant 7, is on the 5 chord. Just creates a little bit more dissonance and makes your ears want to come back to that 1 chord. So dominant 7s oftentimes have a tendency to want to move somewhere else and resolve somewhere. So those are the most common type of 7th chords, but when we bring the diminished triad back in, that's where things can get a little bit interesting with 7th chords. So we're actually going to get 2 kinds of diminished chords when it comes to the 7th chord world. The first one is going to be the diminished 7th chord. So that'll be the root, the flat 3, and the flat 5, just like the diminished triad. But now what we're actually going to do is we're going to take a double flattened 7th. So here's the 7, here's the flat 7, here's the double flat 7. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's the same note as the 6. Why don't we just call it the 6? And the reason is, when we're spelling things in theory, if it's a 7th chord, it needs to go 1, 3, 5, 7. Even if we have to move that 7 way down, it still has to be spelled 1, 3, 5, 7. So the diminished is 1, flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7. Kind of ridiculous, but it's the same note as the 6. So I've got 1, flat 3, flat 5, and double flat 7th for my diminished 7th chord. Very cool chord. Now the second kind of diminished chord we get with our 7th chords is the minor 7 flat 5, also known as the half diminished chord. So how that one's going to work is it still has the diminished triad, so 1, flat 3, flat 5, but then this one's going to have a flat 7, not a double flat 7. So 1, 3, flat 5, and flat 7th. And this chord is, again, used very commonly in jazz, oftentimes leading up to an augmented chord. That sort of sound we definitely hear in jazz quite a bit. So diminished 7th chords will be written as the circle symbol with a 7 on it, or sometimes just dim 7. And for the minor 7 flat 5, or the half diminished, you usually get that MIN 7 flat 5. It looks like you're reading code or something, but that actually is something you'll see. MIN 7 flat 5, minor 7 flat 5. You will also see it written as a half diminished, which is the diminished circle, but with a line going through it, showing half diminished, not full diminished. Both of those chords have some interesting sounds in them, and I definitely recommend exploring them after I show you how to build them. Now, something you're going to start seeing, especially if you're reading jazz, is major 7s, minor 7s, and dominant 7s will sometimes have a sharp 5 or a flat 5 written in there. So one chord that you might see is G7 flattened 5th. So remember, with the 7, you just got to flatten the 5 here, right? So 7 was 1, 3, 5, and flat 7. So again, I just 1, 3, flat 5, flat 7. So a G7 flat 5 would have just this flat 5. See, like I said, you might see flat 5s or sharp 5s with any of the main 7th chords. Another fun chord you want to bring up at this point too is the minor major 7. And this is a chord that's actually built with a minor triad that then has a major 7th on it. So minor triad, root, flat 3, 5, and then a major 7 up here. And this is also known as the spy or the secret agent chord. It sounds like the chord from James Bond. And the final chord before we get to extension chords is going to be sus chords. So you'll sometimes see sus4 chords with the 7 on there. So a chord you might see in your travels is G7 sus4. So that means, the G7, that's going to have the 7th like a G7 chord, right? So it's going to be a flattened 7. And the sus4 means you don't play the 3rd, but you play the 4th. So G7 sus4 is going to be root, 4, 5, and flat 7. Those 4 notes combined. 1, 4, 5, flat 7. No 3rd present. And now for the final chord type, the extensions. And this is where you're going to start seeing 9s, 11s, and 13s, and this is the final step. Now at this point, I want to revisit our scale for just a quick moment here. So what we're going to do here is we're going to play that same 2-octave scale, but we're going to change the names of some of those notes in the higher octave. So the low octave is going to stay the same. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then I'm back to 1. Now in the second octave, 2 is going to be now known as 9. So think about the octave is 8, or the root is 8, so in the second note would be 9. Then we're going to go back the third note here. The fourth we're going to call 11. Then we're back to the fifth. The sixth we're going to call 13, 7, and then back to root. So essentially what we've done is for the low triad in the low octave, 1, 3, 5. You get the same thing in the high octave, 1, 3, 5, and 1. The triad notes are always going to be called 1, 3, 5. And even the seventh chords, they're always going to be called 1, 3, 5, 7. It's the notes in between those that in the second octave are going to be higher. So 2, 4, 6, you're going to know as 9, 11, 13. 2 is 9, 4 is 11, 6 is 13. So again, that's the best way I think to memorize. Instead of 2, 4, 6, 9, 11, 13, and just try to get that in your head. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 9, 3, 11, 5, 13, 7, and back to the root. And that's where all these extensions come from. If you see a ninth chord, it means you have to add the ninth degree of the scale in. So let's first break down ninth chords. You're just going to add that extra note on. So a major 9 will be like a major 7, but with the 9. So 1, 3, 5, 7, and then my 9 right up there. G, B, D, F sharp, and A. So that's a major 9, like a major 7, but with the 9. A minor 9 will be like a minor 7, so 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. With the 9 on it as well. Notice that that's not a flattened 9, just the same 9. So minor 9, minor triad, 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, and 9. And then for the dominant 9, which you'll see written as just 9, that's going to be the major triad, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, and then 9 up there. So ninth chords, you're just adding on that next level. And if you can understand that, you'll understand 11th chords and 13th chords because it's the exact same thing. So major 11 is going to come from the major 7 chord. So that would be root 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11 up there. So we add the 9 and the 11. And that's what an 11 means. You have the 9 and the 11. If I go over to a minor 11, I'd get the minor 7. So 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, 9, and 11. And for my dominant 11, 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, and 11. And the final level is the 13th chords. And again, you just keep stacking one more note in. So a major 13 will be like a major 7, a major 9, and then a major 11, just with the 13 on. So that would be 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13. That's my major 13. It's a major 7 with a 9, 11, and 13. Minor 13 would be the minor 7, with the 9, 11, and 13. And the dominant 13th chord would then be 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 11, and 13. So 9s, 11s, and 13s is the exact same application. You just keep adding one more note on top, and those are extension chords right there. So that is all the knowledge. Now the next step is going to be putting these on the guitar and how we actually build these on this instrument. Now one piece of knowledge we got to talk about at this point is the fact that we only have 6 strings on this instrument. We only have 4 fingers, sometimes a 5th. So how are we supposed to play a chord that has 7 notes in it, right? A 13th chord should have 7 notes in it. How do we do that on this instrument? And well, the answer is it's not possible to do every single note. So what you do as a guitarist is you take notes out of chords. And that's what this next little segment is going to be about, is what notes can I remove from chords? So not every note in every chord is created equal. Some notes in chords are more important. What I mean by more important is if you play just the important notes and not the unimportant notes, it'll still sound like the chord, as long as you take out only the unimportant notes. So let's get down to the notes we can take out. So the first note that you can always take out of a chord is the 5th. The 5th does nothing for a chord. It just kind of adds in a little bit of an extra texture. Doesn't determine whether it's minor or major, right? It's not an important note. So kick the 5th out. We don't need it. The next one, weirdly enough, you can kick out. It's kind of unexpected, but the root is often a note you can take out, as long as you're playing with a band. Like if you've got a bass player behind you, they're gonna play that root note. That's their job, right? Piano player, same thing. They're probably gonna be playing that root note. So as a guitarist, you can drop the root and the 5th of the chord. And the next one you can drop are the extensions that aren't written on the chord. So say you're playing a G13. Take out the 9 and the 11th, because clearly this song just wants the 13th. That's the most important extension. So if I were to build that chord for a second here, I'll take out the 5th. So I've got G, there's my 5th, I'm not gonna put him in there. I've got my flat 7, I've got my 3rd up there, and then my 13th is gonna be right there. So this would be a G13, even though I'm only playing notes. I've got all the essentials. I've got a root, flat 7, 3rd, and 13th. So this is gonna count as a G13 right here. So now that you know a little bit about what notes we can take out of chords, let's try building some on this instrument. Now this can be a bit of a creative activity, and you can get a whole bunch, almost infinite ways to play chords here. So I want to show you a bit of a template with a bit of basic information that you can learn and then use that to modify to build any chord you want. So here's what we're going to check out first, is actually this way of playing a G major 7 chord. This is what I want to talk about first here. So this is a classic way of playing a G major 7. If I break it down, I've got my root, I've got my 7 here, my major 7, I've got a major 3rd, and then I've got a 5th up here. So root, 7, 3, and 5. So there's my G major 7. Again, really get that in your head. Root, 7, 3, and 5. So to turn a major 7 into a dominant 7, the only difference was the 7th changed, right? They're both 1, 3, 5. Major 7 has a regular 7. Dominant 7 has a flat 7. So 1, 3, 5, flat 7. So which one of these was the 7? I had the root. That one was the 7. So I got to flatten it, which means move it down 1 fret here to the 3rd fret. Now I'm just going to kind of make me reform the rest of this chord here, because now I got to get that note there. But the other 2 stayed, so I gotta get 4 on the G and 5 on the B. So I'll reform this to be like this, right here. And I've got my first finger just laying across the A string to mute it. So 1, mute, flat 7, 3, 5, and then mute the high E. So that would be a G7. Now the third 7th chord type I was talking about was the minor 7. So again, how do we change a dominant 7 into a minor 7? Well, we just changed the 3rd to be a minor 3rd, right? Flatten the 3rd. So I've got a root 7, 3, 5, flatten that 3rd one, move it down 1 fret. So now that's kind of hard to play, so I might just grab this just like this right here with 2 fingers. So root, flat 7, flat 3, and 5. So that is how you build these 7th chords, right? You got your major 7, you got your dominant 7, and you've got a minor 7 that we just spelt here. So now let's turn this G major 7 into a major 13th chord. So major 13, that was a major 7 with the 9, 11, and 13, but I don't have enough fingers to do that. So again, I'm going to take out the 9, the 11, I'm also going to take out the 5th. So let's see here, I've got root, 7, 3rd, and here's the 5th right here. Like I said, I don't need that one. The 13th is one whole step above that 5th. So if I go 2 frets above this note, that 5th is going to go up to become a 13. So I got to refinger a little bit here, right? So I'm going to go 4, 4, add in the pinky, and that's now a G major 13 chord right there. All the information is there. Root, 7, 3rd, and 13th. So it's a G major 13th. A G minor 13th, I just have to flatten the 3rd and the 7th down one. So that is a G minor 13 right there. And then a G dominant 13th, still has the flat 7. There's a G dominant 13th, sometimes fingered like this to make it a little bit easier. Now let's try some 6th chords here. So if here's my major 7, let's change that 7 into a 6. So here's the 7, here's the flat 7 at 3, there's the 6 right there. So I've just got to move that 4th fret on the D back to the 2nd fret on the D. So I'm going to reform. Some of the other fingers will have to change, but boom, now I've got a root, 6, 3, and 5. So that is a G6 I'm now playing right there. If I wanted to change this to a minor 6, I take that 4th fret and I flatten it down. The 3rd becomes a flat 3, and now that is a G minor 6 right there. Very cool, mysterious sounding chord. And now let's try some of those altered weird chords with a flattened 5th. So let's go back to that one I was talking about earlier, a G7 flat 5. So G, I've got my 1, my 7, my flat 7 is right there. I've got my 3 right here. The 5 was here. Let's flatten that one. So boom. G7 flat 5 is that spicy chord right there. Or if I wanted to play a sharp 5, right? There's the regular 5. Got to move it up to the 4 right there, right? 5, flat 5, 5, sharp 5. So I'll stick that guy at the top and boom. Now that's a G7 sharp 5. Now it may look like I'm doing totally different chord voicings, but a lot of the notes are actually staying the same. It's just the fingering has to change to adjust it. And that's it, you guys. That's how you build chords on the guitar. First, you have to understand that chords come from scales. You have to know the formula for every chord, and then you can just spell them out and build them for yourself. So like I was saying, you don't need to go buy a book that says every guitar chord imaginable. You don't need to go hire a teacher to show you how to play these advanced chords. If you work on this yourself, you can just do all of these chords your own way. You can build them yourself. And I gotta tell you, it's a lot more efficient for you as a learner to build these for yourself. When you build them yourself, you have a tendency to remember them a lot more. If somebody just shows you something, it'll slip out of your head. But if you have to actually sit down and work it out, that's when it's gonna start to stick. So take a basic jazz chord chart and start running through it, start building the chords. A song like Autumn Leaves, right? Even if you take the first 8 bars of Autumn Leaves. Try to build all those chords and map them out on the guitar. Now, if you're a little confused, don't beat yourself up. This lesson was very much drinking from a fire hose. This was a ton of information, so please go back and watch this as many times as you need. And if you're feeling a little bit confused right now, don't beat yourself up. This was a lot of theory information. Now, in this lesson, we were using scales to build chords. And if you want to further your understanding of scales, I would highly recommend learning how to improvise and solo with scales. So just for hanging out with me and sitting through this massive theory session, I want to give you a free gift to help you start soloing now. I'm talking about this book right here. This lesson is called How to Instantly Solo in Any Key, and it will definitely give you the ability to immediately see keys and scales on the guitar and get you soloing in no time at all. One of the cool things that this free book is going to do is it's going to help you identify any key on the guitar instantly. Then it's going to show you a formula on how you can use that to solo and create your own solos on the fly. And it's 100% yours and it's 100% free, so click right here now to get access to it. You can also find a link to it in the description of this video. Guitar is a very quickly rewarding instrument, and it's lessons like these that get you right into soloing without having to have any theory knowledge, so check it out.